The Ogre Kingdoms are the rightful domain of the large and brutish ogre race. Wandering tribes of ogres can be found wrecking their way across the globe, erecting many strongholds and plundering far-off on exotic lands, the likes of which no man will ever see in their lifetime. Yet no matter how far away they may be, all ogres refer to the scattered tribal kingdoms that dominate the slopes and river valleys of the mountains of Morn, their rightful, hard-earned homeland. It is here amongst the frozen peaks and blistering blizzards that mighty tyrants rule over their own brutal kingdoms, warring amongst each other, looting, extorting and ransacking all before them as a tribute to their own gluttonous appetite and their ever-hungry god, the Great Maw. They fight as thugs, bandits and mercenaries, their hulking numbers coming from a wide diversity of warmongering tribes scattered all across the mountain range. They pick on the strong and the weak alike, battling mighty foes and powerful kingdoms many thousands of miles away, all for the alluring promise of gold, plunder and mead. Even here amongst the peaks, where they hold claim to all fearsome beast and mighty creatures, dominate the dark corners of their realm, preying on all those who come too close. Yet such is the ogre's ferocious, stubborn and ever-ravenous nature that they see these creatures not as a foe to cower and hide from, but as a challenge that needs to be brought down, crushed beneath their boot. Armies have come and gone throughout the ages into the mountains, but only the ogres can truly claim to have conquered it all. It was the ogres who brought down the mighty sky titans of the upper peaks, bringing their civilization low and condemning their children into exile or enslavement. It is they who once claimed the mighty realm within the great steppes of the Far East, battling the ancient Grand Empire of Cathay for supremacy before the day came that their ever-hungry god, the Great Maw, punished the ogres for their sins and brought about the great migration of their race. That was many thousands of years ago, and the ogre grow in numbers once more. The cycle of history is set to repeat itself. Should nothing stop them now, it is said that the ogres will stop at nothing to devour every living thing within this ravaged world. The ogre race as a whole are a completely superstitious and illiterate group, and there are very little to no recorded accounts of history within their race. What little information about the history remains can only be deciphered from ancient cave paintings or the oral stories passed down their culture from generation to generation. Though many of these accounts are extremely exaggerated and overly fantasized, there may yet be truth within the story that no one would dare to believe. Where exactly the ogres come from and how they fit in with the other races of the world is a question many scholars have asked. Of course, such questions never occur to the ogres themselves, for they are not scholarly in the least, being unable to read or write. Ogres do value legends, often exaggerated tales of bravado told around campfires, and they do recall major events within their cave drawings, but to an ogre, history means the last meal, and ancient history is the feast before that. They are far more concerned with obtaining their next dinner than with the debate how or why they came to be. Elven loremasters believe that the Old Ones, the mysterious beings that shaped so many of the creatures that walked the world, made the ogres to join the fight against the rising powers of chaos. However, the elves theorized that quite a bit was left unfinished with the race when the polar gates collapsed, ushering in a tide of chaos powers to the world. To the elves, this explains the crude and intolerable vulgar nature of the ogres, and hence the graceful rulers of Earth-1 generally disdain them as slowly and dim-witted race. Human scholars, led by the strangely prophetic imperial philosopher Albrecht of Nuln, believe that the ogres are close kindred to the race of halflings, perhaps coming from some common stock but somewhere in time splitting into two divergent species, perhaps through some foul mutation. There are many similarities. Both races are resistant to the effects of chaos, both have comparable and all-consuming need to search out their next meal, and both bear unusual behavioral traits. For ogres, the need to smash and eat everything. For halflings, the compulsion to swipe anything not nailed down. Ogres are large, loud creatures. Even in a violent world used to constant warfare, it is hard to not be aware of a creature that can smash a man's ribs and send him flying through the air with a single swipe of an iron-bound club. Though if raw strength alone isn't enough to cause a stir, the sight of an ogre reaching out a meaty hand to lift up and consume his recently broken victim in great, greedy bites is sure to register horror in all but the boldest of hearts. Ogres are restless creatures, and their tribes are nomadic, ready to move camp at the drop of a well-gnawn bone. Ogres often wander far from their homelands, and when their armies are on the move, they leave behind them a trail of wreckage and little else. The great tramp sound of an ogre army on the march is not a welcome one, for they will attack and plunder any settlement they come across. In this manner, armies resupply on the move, consuming any who are foolish enough to stay to defend their home, and then devouring all the livestock and anything else that looks eatable. Any meat not devoured immediately is carried off, so ogres and their enormous war beasts are often seen with huge hunches of meat and unplugged rib cages tied to their bodies. The first thing anyone notices about ogres is how big they are. A full-grown ogre stands nearly twice as tall as a man and several times as wide. Those who deal with ogres find they chiefly exhibit two distinct expressions, that of a glum intimidation and a sinister grin, which is far worse. Aside from rancid meat breath that can startle a dwarf sober, ogres have flat, overlapping teeth that are unusually strong. They can bite through the bark of a sturdy dragwild oak as easily as if it was the skin of a roast chicken. When an ogre grins, it has little to do with mirth, and everything to do with showing the victim what is going to happen next. The gut of a common ogre is of utmost importance to its owner, socially, spiritually, and physically. An ogre with a large gut is seen as wealthy and strong, for he has obviously eaten well to ensure such impressive girth. The ogre religion revolves around eating, and the gluttonous butchers believe that they can commune with their primitive god through this simple act. Perhaps this is due to the fact that the ogre's vital organs are situated far lower than man's. These organs are protected by a thick layer of muscles and can grind and crack food with terrific force, allowing the ogre to digest almost anything he cares to toss into his cavernous maw. But the common ogre leaves nothing to chance when it comes to his beloved abdomen, and protects his innards further with a large circular gut plate. This is usually made of a metal, beaten into shape or even cast in mold. The gut plate is secured around the ogre's waist by a heavy belt that is often used to store the ogre's eating tools. While the ogres are undeniably fat, underneath all that blubber resides massive slabs of pure muscle. Their thick arms end in great ham-fisted hands that wield large clubs with lethal ease. An ogre's legs are stout and tireless, all the better to carry such a lumpen frame. With thick skin as resilient as cured leather and lungs as large as a man's torso, ogres can survive cold climates and are extremely tough, able to shrug off minor wounds. For this reason, only the richest and most elite ogres bother with armor beyond their gut plates, instead stride to battle bare-chested. The body hair is lank and greasy, and although it is common for an ogre to be as bald as a boulder, it is rare indeed that one can be found without facial hair. It is common amongst many tribes to tattoo themselves or daub themselves with war paint. An ogre is not a very intelligent creature. Learned scholars describe them as thick as two short planks, meaning they have sufficient intelligence to nail the two planks together and beat the observer over the head with it. Indeed, for an ogre's brain is extraordinarily small in comparison to its body, yet their skulls are many times thicker to protect what little intelligence remains. Rumor has it that by putting an ear close to an ogre's head, it is possible to hear the ocean. This, however, seems unlikely speculation, as no one in their right mind would dare to put his ear that close to such a ravenous creature's mouth. It is true that most ogres are somewhat dim and as a race do not invent things or create anything beauty or lasting worth. Instead of cunning or intrigue, ogres are straightforward, being wholly untroubled by such things as morality or worries over questions of good and evil. If ogres can get what they want, food and wealth, without fighting, they will do so. But if it's more advantageous to annihilate and eat their opposition, then so be it. Ogres are an arguably benign race, going about their business with little or no malice, and although far from bright, they have an uncanny business-like sense to recognize if the victim is worth more alive than dead. It is a plum situation to have nearby villagers pay livestock every cycle of the moon in order to prevent an ogre attack. Over time, such arrangements pay more than if the ogres had eaten them all. Yet there's one belief that unites ogres across the world, beaten into them at infancy and carried with them to the grave. Might makes right. A strong creature may take what he likes from a weaker creature, including life and limb. Every aspect of the culture of the Ogre Kingdoms revolves around this central tenet. Engraved on the mind of every inhabitant from the scrawniest knobbler to the mightiest tyrant, ogres go great lengths to illustrate their prowess, although an ogre's status can quickly be assessed by the physical size and the dimension of his gut. Nonetheless, ogres adorn themselves with trophies taken from the cave beasts they have defeated, daub war paint on their bare flesh to indicate tribal allegiance, take names that refer to their personal strength, and ritually scar themselves to prove that they feel no pain. A full-grown bull arrayed for battle is a daunting sight. A leader such as a bruiser or a tyrant positively terrifying. Dominance within ogre society is often regulated by two things: power and guts. The stronger the ogre, the higher up he is in their brutish tribal hierarchy, and the fatter his gut, the more obvious his power is shown to his friends and his enemies. The largest and most powerful ogre within the entire kingdom is known as the Over-Tyrant, the current ruler being the infamous obese Grease's Goldtooth. Below him stands a large collection of lesser tribal leaders known simply as tyrants, and are typically the leaders of their own tribe or pretty kingdom within the mountains of Morn. They naturally rise to rule and do so with an iron fist. The next largest ogres under the tyrants' rule are known as Ruses, and these contenders for tribal power assume lesser command duties. Dissension within a tribe is handled with sudden and predictable violence, and any who questions a tyrant's decision must be prepared to fight the leader in a match to the death. Before such a duel, each ogre removes his gut plate, an ominous sign, as the victor in such a contest is expected to feast on the guts of the loser. Ogres refer to this traditionally as a guts-out challenge. Ascension to tribal rule is not entirely hereditary, since all an ogre has to do is to defeat the current tyrant, yet it does follow a similar, if not gruesome, line of succession, as the most powerful ogres tend to sire the strongest offspring. Thus begets a generational cycle of violence, where a tyrant eventually faces his most ambitious son in a challenge, and to remain as a ruler he must beat down and eat his own rebellious offspring, or be eaten in turn. Ogres, being what they are, find this normal and speak proudly of relatives who put up a good showing. Ogre tyrants are bullies of the first degree, and unleashing abrupt violence helps them to keep an iron rule over their tribe. A common tradition amongst tyrants is it to pull a limb or two of anyone who offends them, such as those who speak too much or any ogre that accidentally eats one of the tyrant's favorite noblars. The commonly used phrase that will cost an arm or a leg stems from this practice. The ogre race, no matter what kingdom or lands they may hail from, all pay homage to a ravenous, all-consuming god, known in their tongue simply as the Great Maw. The Great Maw, alongside its lesser offspring, the Firemouth, are the primary and sole deities of the ogre race. All ogres pay homage to these malevolent deities not out of any sense of love or admiration, but one of total raw fear. The Great Maw was the one responsible for the near destruction of the ogre race. Their once beautiful and plentiful homeland now is scorched and barren wasteland, as punishment for their sins. It was the Great Maw that now cursed the ogres' once full bellies into gaping holes from which no amount of food or substance can ever hope to fill. From the moment of its arrival, no ogre would ever dare to question his existence, for all he has to do is to listen to the hunger which growls within his gut to know the curse the Great Maw has placed upon their race.
No voice in our ears but the Maw. We relish the sound of its call. We'll thunder and feast on any man, any beast, doesn't matter, we'll snack on them all. The stragglers we didn't consume are dropped in our sacrifice stew. They scream and they run, but that's part of the fun, 'cause the ogres are coming to get ya! There's jumping on knees, feeling our fancy, our stomach trees, tearing, chewing, we kill for the Maw, the power and wrath what we're going for. Clutching and biting, we kill for the Maw, the power and wrath what we're doing it for. Clutching and biting, we kill for the Maw, the power and wrath what we're doing it for.
Shh. Look at that thing. Please and thank you.